And now, everyone, please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to our host, Rick Ramsey.
All right. Thanks for joining us. And today I am here once again with the illustrious Senior Vice President of Production Services at HBO, Mr. Stephen Beres. Let's get up for Stephen Beres, everybody. And today we are going to talk about Game of Thrones. Like, how can you not say HBO and then talk about Game of Thrones?
That's right. Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
So, on a personal level, with you, I was asking the audience before you got here, who was your all-time favorite character in the series?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually have quite a bit of trouble divorcing the characters from the actors that play those characters, which is sort of funny. Yeah, I mean, I think overall, the person that stayed sort of consistently fun to watch was probably Tyrion. I think overall that character kind of spoke to my sensibilities, I think, a little bit. I enjoy, and Peter's performance of that character is fantastic, obviously. And Peter Dinklage is also an amazing human being and much different than Tyrion Lannister, but at the same time also that same kind of sarcastic and jovial sort of human being. So yeah, but I think there was a lot of really interesting, sort of second tier, if you will, or supporting characters that, it's such a rich story. It's really hard to kind of have a single favorite. I mean, I love everyone that worked on the show, and it was a rare opportunity to work with a group of people that were all genuinely nice, warm, caring people. You traditionally don't get that on a crew of almost 1,000 people by the end of season 8. You normally have a number of folks that you'd maybe not love to spend a lot of time with.
Right.
But we were so incredibly lucky to have such an amazing group, from the cast all the way through, everyone who worked on the crew were all genuinely, amazing people. And, a lot of the crew especially, and some of the supporting cast certainly, extras and things, were from Northern Ireland. We're from that. They were working in their hometown in some cases, and that was sort of remarkable because the people of Northern Ireland are absolutely amazing. I mean, certainly, if you get an opportunity to go to Belfast at any point in the future, you really should. It is an amazing, maybe not right now, but I guess I don't even know if you can go there right now. I'm not even sure if planes fly there right now. But
plane flights are cheap right now.
Yeah, that's right. You can get a great deal. I don't think you're banned from the UK yet, but it is it is an amazing place. It is an amazing place, and you've been there, Rick.
I was there. For those of you who don't know, when Stephen came to visit campus, I think the year right about when you were being inducted in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, could have been something like that.
He offered, if you ever want to tour the sets in Belfast, let me know. And my son's graduation was that year, and I said, well, I will take you up on that. So for his graduation present, I had 2 tickets to Belfast, and we went. We actually went a few days early, talking about how the local a lot of people were extras there. They had started an entire tourist industry based on Game of Thrones. It's still there.
Oh, yeah.
Run by people who say they were cast members. Usually
Sure.
they're all the Night's Watch. It's like, we're all in the Night's Watch, except one old man claimed that he was a Dothraki slave trader.
Could have been.
So he could have been. He had faded pictures and stuff. And then there were a couple people that claimed that they owned 2 of the Direwolves. But that one didn't seem. I have a picture of my son with two huskies.
Yeah, I mean, in the first
So,
the first season,
the
the puppies, the direwolf puppies were sort of I don't know how old they were, but they were huskies with some additional hair pieces kind of added to them. And actually, the direwolves is a funny story because we experimented with all kinds of crazy stuff, to get those to look right. Dogs that we would dress differently and stuff, but nothing kind of matches a wolf. You really have to have a full a full-bred wolf, which is an intimidating thing to be around. We used to shoot that wolf pack in Castaic in California, and the whole process around working with those animals is really interesting. They work inside of an electric fence ring, not because the wolves care about the electric fence. Quite frankly, they could easily jump over it. But the sound, they're a little nervous of the sound. They don't like going too close. We can't hear it, but they can. And then there's always not a purebred wolf. There's always like a half husky, half wolf that they keep with them that keeps them calm.
Oh.
Sort of like a calming goat, but it's a partially bred wolf specifically for that purpose. And the handlers are amazing in how they know exactly how the animals react, how to keep people safe around them, because they are wolves. You can train them, but you can't tame them, is sort of how they describe it, in that, they are motivated by food and they understand that these people give them food if they do things. But if they decide today is not the day, then I'm going to get that. Instead, I'm going to eat that PA. Then, if they make that decision, you've got to know what to do, in a moment's notice. And that wolf pack actually moved up to Calgary, my hometown up in Canada, and so we would travel there in future seasons. But the direwolves were almost always shot on green screen because we needed to make them appear larger, and because it's much safer. We could never really have those, especially because they are actual wolves. We could never have them on set proper, and we're not going to travel them to Belfast. That's way too hard on them and things like that. They don't really travel like that. So a lot of that stuff was green screen, but also a lot of the interaction with the actors. We would take the actors to the wolves, and they would and they would interact. Maisie was there for, Maisie Williams was there for in Calgary for a little bit, and and Kit Harington was there for a little bit, because sometimes it's just forced perspective, and that's easier to do, or actually interacting with the wolves was what we wanted to do. So so it was really interesting, stuff, and a weird experience to be. There's a very interesting energy around those animals. It's and I am crazy allergic to wolves.
Really?
Crazy allergic to wolves.
Did you find this out on the show?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I even took a bunch of like decongestants and antihistamines and stuff. Didn't matter. It was just they're a very musky animal.
Wow.
Very musky.
Well, before we started, we were having some dialogue here with our audience, and so I'm going to open it up for questions from them, and I believe we'll start on this side. Anybody here have a question? Over here? Just raise your hand. Over on this side? No one on this side has a question. Right here we go. Right down here. And then we're going to move over to this side.
It's about season 8. My question is, why did you guys decide to go a completely different direction with Daenerys and have her just go mad and kill everyone?
So here's the thing. It's we don't decide anything. David and Dan decide that. The showrunners decide that, and the writing team decides that. Obviously in conversation with George Martin and the creative team on the show. What I can say is that we early on in the series obviously make a commitment to our creative team, to our showrunners, and we're there to back them up and to back up their vision and to allow them to tell the story that they want to tell. Now, whether we agree with the direction or we don't, whether we, sort of have, feedback from subscribers that they do or they don't, that's immaterial, or at least secondary to the vision of those creatives. That's what we're here to do as the studio. We're here to support them and make sure that they can realize their vision. So that's a good David and Dan question. I'll tell you that they have had the season realized in its entirety for some time. That it definitely wasn't we got a season 8, so what are we gonna do? They knew early on in the show how the show ended. They knew early on in the show the arcs of those characters, and we're building towards those arcs, sort of throughout the show. So But again, I mean, the only thing that I'll say from our standpoint is that, we're here to support that creative, to support that vision.
I'm always amazed, early on in the Academy Awards or the Emmys, when, someone was recognized or HBO was recognized or something that was created through HBO, the creatives would always say something to the effect of, "Thank you for allowing me to realize my vision, my dream," which is unique because in this day and age of, streaming services, they're all operating a little bit different. Netflix started by buying up whatever was offered them before they started in-house creation, right? And Hulu is just now embarking on in-house. So you kind of set a standard there. I think Game of Thrones was a part of that standard, but it actually existed way before that,
Yeah, no, I mean, we are coming up on our 50th anniversary in 2022, so 50 years of HBO. Not all of that has been original programming. We started that later on in our tenure, but yeah, it's always been that we want to be the place where, and I've said this many times this week, but where new and original voice can find a platform, to put that show out into the world, and for every Game of Thrones, we want a Euphoria, we want a Looking, we want a Girls, we want something that couldn't be made somewhere else. And to be fair, for every Euphoria, for every Looking, for every Girls, we want Game of Thrones. We want, because I think that Game of Thrones couldn't have been made anywhere else either, and not because of dragons and the amazing design work that our scening team has done and the amazing visual effects work that Steve Kolbach and his team and Joe Bauer did, but that we have an amazing character drama, that we have these incredible, relationships with these amazing people, just happens to be set in this amazing fantasy world with these incredible special effects and incredible sets and things. But when you distill it down to the reason that people love Game of Thrones, it isn't just because of those scenic and visual effects. It's because of the characters. It's because, and the reason that people are upset or love or hate or whatever any season or the whole series is because they develop a relationship with those characters. And ending any relationship, as those of you who've been in a long-term relationship understand, it doesn't matter if it ends well or poorly or neutrally. You feel something about that. That's hard to do. It's hard to separate from something that you've been with for a decade. For us making it and for you watching it, it's a difficult transition to a world that doesn't have it. I don't know how many of you guys know Craig Daly from Platinum Creative, but he's just been wandering around in parks and things, not knowing what to do with himself on Sunday nights because he says there's an overwhelming sense of loss. We're working to fill that void, hopefully with other shows. But I really do believe there's something to that. It's something that was sort of woven into our culture for the better part of a decade. 8 seasons over almost 10 years. 10 years for us working on it. It's hard to just have that disappear all of a sudden from the world. No matter how it ended, good, bad, or otherwise, you will absolutely have feelings about that, and it's okay. We're all grieving together. I'm probably grieving less because it's a lot less work for me now.
We're gonna take another question, but just give me 1 second. My son always complains that I turn everything into a learning moment. I'm like, your dad's a teacher, so get over it. But the takeaway on this for the students here is all of us are creatives, but none of us are the best at all parts and aspects of creativity. And I have found in my personal experience that the best product is always when you let people do the best at what they do best and not try to run everything. And my best thing is producing. And believe me, for a producer who wanted to be a director, it's really hard to look at something and tell the director, sure, do that. Do whatever you want. Where in my head I'm going, oh, I really would have done that a different way. But what I'm looking at now as a producer is the bottom line. Can I make this vision happen for them? And that I find is my success. Can I really make this vision happen for them so that it's satisfying? When we do productions here on campus, I always try to make that production satisfying to the student experience, as well as whether that entity is from an outside or from inside, because I feel that's what my role is, right? All right, let's move over to this side. Question right here.
Who's got a microphone?
Mic here. There we go. The mic's running down here.
Let's get a mic to Mitch.
Hi guys, morning. So I was going to ask about what the specific qualities of Game of Thrones drew you in, but since we just kind of talked about that, I want to ask about a different show that you've worked on. Before you were involved with Westworld, I would love to know what the specific qualities of that show made you want to sign in and really get involved with that project.
Sorry, ask that question again with the coffee cup business up here. I wasn't paying total attention to you, Mitch. I apologize.
No worries, no worries. So I was going to ask originally what the qualities of Game of Thrones were that really drew you into work on it, but since we just talked about that, I want to ask about Westworld and what the qualities of that show made you want to get all in and work on it.
Well, I think, first of all, Westworld it's just interesting to see an existing property like Westworld reimagined for, a contemporary audience. I think, a lot of people don't realize the original Michael Crichton film, actually directed by Michael Crichton, which is also an extreme rarity, was the first time that we saw this sort of unrelenting force sort of pursuing, someone, the villain of the story in the Yul Brynner character is this sort of unstoppable robot force pursuit. This was years before the Terminator film. This was years before that type of sci-fi gone wrong sort of genre. Michael Crichton and Westworld was so far ahead of its time, and for a little while in the late 1980s and through all of the 90s, that was a mainstay of science fiction, right? You think about, and also Michael Crichton's work. Well, Michael Crichton's work is always theme parks go awry, if you will. If you wanted to sort of take a thesis of his work, thing that you thought was going to go fine goes awry because you do something against the sort of laws of nature and science, right? That's the thesis of his work is like, science is such a powerful tool that if it's mistreated or we're cavalier about it, that it will come back and bite us. And in the case of Jurassic Park, literally. But I think that, a lot of people don't realize, right, that early on that Westworld is sort of canonical work so far as the foundation of science fiction in the cast of the abuse of science is you have to pay a penalty. So I was very interested in seeing what that development looked like, and then of course once it gets turned over to production, simply the world that Lisa and Jonah had imagined, that this and of course the cowboy world shot at the Melody Ranch in Santa Clarita, which is 5 minutes from my house, so that was very attractive. But the idea of the underground portion, the Delos Labs portion, all glass, and this sort of idea of these aren't human beings; they look like human beings, but they're very much treated as objects, as sort of machines. The way that was explored visually was totally unlike anything that certainly I had seen in that sort of realm of science fiction, right? The all sort of glass, the lit roof, the way that the robots were created, or the hosts were created with sort of technology that we kind of recognize from today, 3D printing, resin printing, additive manufacturing, all of the sort of, CNC machining, all the sort of things that we think of now of making, widgets and baubles and things that are mass manufactured like that, put towards essentially the creation of life forms, of humanoid looking, indistinguishable from human beings, was also fascinating. The resin tank that, creates the, the sort of the skin, if you will, of the host being dipped in and out, which is white latex house paint, is actually what that liquid is, dipping those, these sort of printed host bodies in and out. absolutely amazing, right? Absolutely fascinating and visually so compelling. And I think that just speaks to the whole world of Westworld. Like, I think it speaks to this sort of modern interpretation of what, today's society, just like Westworld of the day, Yul Brynner's face pops off and there's, weird computer circuits and things inside of there. Because at the time that film was made, that was the sort of considered the state of the art. And if they had to make a robot person in that, in that decade, that's how they would have done it. Just like if we had to make a robot person today, this is sort of what we imagine the future of that would look like. And I think it's very interesting. And science fiction is such an amazing sample of our interpretation of future technology, but only for the time that it's made, right? I'm sure if we look back at our Westworld 40 years from now, 50 years from now, we'll sort of say the same thing, like, oh, isn't that hilarious? They were really into 3D printing back then before they had material actualization or whatever we're doing then. And I think so for those reasons, I think that's why it's such an amazing sort of project to work on, but also because Lisa and Jonah are so Lisa Joy and Jonah Nolan are so deeply sort of steeped. Jonah is an amazing sort of fan of all of this stuff. He loves technology. He's deeply embedded in the world of tech. He loves interactivity, and he loves additive reality and all of these sort of new technologies that are just sort of emerging. He's right there with them. He loves all of that stuff. And so for a creator like that, he's also a big Land Rover guy, which I appreciate. So for all of that, sort of energy and interest in a showrunner to be put into this sort of stream, I mean, it's such a perfect fit that, yeah, I think that's what's such a great show.
The original movie, there were 2 or 3.
Oh, there were a bunch of them. Yeah, there
Yeah.
was a number of different sort of Planet of the Apes style back then.
Yes.
They would do like, oh, this one was really good. Now we're going to spend 1/4 of the money, and we're going to spend a weekend writing a script. And yeah, there are a couple of different ones. And I don't remember. They're all different worlds. I don't remember all of them. I've only actually seen, I think, the second one, because that was when the studio they would own the rights to it, and they would just get a studio writer to write a sequel, and they would go shoot it.
Have you seen all of them? The last one, it is kind of linked with where HBO has taken it, where they go out into the world, but they're all still controlled by humans. They're not self-sustaining like they are in the HBO version, but it kind of leads to that and kind of taking over key points of humanity. And it's interesting. Never as good as the first one, but it's the other. I think there are 2 more are interesting. Over here? Over online? All right. We have an online question.
Yes.
Online question.
Online question. Derek, who's one of our computer animation students, would like to know which season of Game of Thrones was your favorite.
Ooh, they're all my favorite for different reasons. They're all my
That's what you say to your
favorite for
children.
different reasons. Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I'm way too connected to it to really have a favorite or a least favorite, quite frankly, because I think for different reasons they're both. All of them are both. I think the first season where we were just sort of figuring out what the show was, where we had a real sort of energy behind trying to solve some of these big problems. That was a really fun season to work on, and subsequent seasons were also great. The last season we made some technical advances that are still probably unmatched in television. We were really at a feature film level and beyond most feature films from a technology standpoint, from a production standpoint, and from an organization standpoint of having that many people working in that many different countries all around the world at the same time in a seamless manner was a very impressive things to see. And that's entirely to the credit of our production team, notably Bernie Cofield, our executive producer, who is the actual mother of dragons. She is a force of nature and one of the most impressive people I've ever met. And she's able to keep the 800 plates spinning in 5 different countries sort of all all at the same time in a way that, she makes it look not easy, but she makes it look sustainable, which I think is notable, because anybody can do anything for a short amount of time. If you can do something at that level of production and complexity for a sustained period of time, for a long time like that, that is truly remarkable. That kind of grit and determination and organization and systemizing is really, really impressive.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe when Brody, my son, and I were there, we toured some of your editing areas. And I think one of the things that we talked about was the fact that the animators for the dragons would create that animation, and then you would create the barrel system that the actor would ride based on what the animators created.
Yeah,
which is
exactly,
very much a game industry technique, right? To create that and then create the user interface after.
Yeah, no, and we had to do that in a number of cases. In fact, the flame throwing dragon, our famous flamethrower robot, the most terrifying apparatus ever created by humankind, was driven by the animation of the dragon CG character, and was mapped on set over top of the flamethrower robot, so that in previs on set in the Marin fighting pit, the dragon lands and starts spraying people with fire. If you look at the monitor, there's a grayscale dragon there spraying fire at people. If you look in front of you, there's a crazy camera crane with a flamethrower strapped to it, spraying fire at people. And so, to see those elements all come together, the dragon's ready to go, the dragon is there and is playing on set, like a sort of dragon would, at least if you're looking on the monitor. You get such a sense of performance, you get such a sense of scale, and is this going to work? Does this feel epic? Does this feel, that we wouldn't get if, okay, shoot the fire element plate, now shoot the, the coverage plate, now shoot the camera movement plate, and you have a panther dolly going back and forth doing motion control for 2 days, and no one really sees it all come together until months down the line. I think that produces a completely different kind of ferociousness in performance, or a lack of, probably, compared to having those elements in many ways live composited. And that's why Joe, our visual effects supervisor, and Steve, our visual effects producer, were so married to the idea of real elements, when possible, sell the unreal. So real fire, if the fire is real, if you believe the fire, you believe the dragon, as Joe is famous for saying. And I think that's absolutely true, because when you see those real elements created in the space, and it's connected to an unreal item, your brain sort of starts saying, like, well, wait a second. Well, I can easily tell that's real fire, and particle animation is amazing, and fluid simulation and things are amazing, and CG fire is quite good, but it's not perfect. Whereas real fire is perfect. Real fire does things unpredictably, so you need to be prepared for that. But it has an element of chaos to it, I think, that sells the entire dragon in a way that we wouldn't have it without. And obviously, we're not spraying fire from a helicopter when we do the flyover scenes and things like that. That simply wouldn't be possible or safe or legal or anything. But when we can use those realistic elements, we could have had CG direwolves, and sometimes we did. But whenever possible, using the real element, the real fire element, the real animal element, the real, in some cases, real horses, maybe in clean passes in battles and things like that. But you feel that, you know that, your brain knows that, and it lends a legitimacy to the things that can't be done for real, right. That I think we benefit from. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, that's a long way of saying, I think we were able to do things on the show in the last couple of seasons that there are still feature films that can't achieve that level. And we were only able to do that because we had such an amazing group of craftspeople working.
Well, I have to tell you, and thank you, an unforgettable moment for Brody and I was when we stood on one of the ships for the ship battle, and 40 feet in the air all around us was green screen. and we're looking down from the uncle's ship onto the other ship and just watching this battle with real fire. And it was just
the
amazing.
ash cannon. The ash cannon is one of my favorite tools. It's
Just
very cool.
amazing. But when you're there, there's only half a ship. Like either ship, there's only half a ship. And then when you watch it on television, and we're sitting, go, where were we standing? I think we were standing somewhere. Who knows? I mean, it's become so much bigger than what it was, and yet when we were there, it was big. So that idea of believability, I totally get what you're saying.
Well, and for actors too. I mean, you think about it. You're acting in this environment where you're seeing real fire, you're feeling the heat, you're seeing the ash rain down on top of you. This drawbridge is being lowered and squishing a guy in front of you. I mean, there's a certain there's a certain ferociousness to that. There's a certain energy in that air, and I do believe that does bring a performance out. I'm not even anywhere close to an actor, but you hear them talk about how connected to that environment they feel in the moment. And a lot of the stuff, I mean, they're reacting to what's really happening. I mean, this is some crazy stuff,
Well, I can tell you, I just need a whiff of diesel, and I'm back on the ship. Because that ship was really on fire.
Yeah, it was.
It really was really on fire.
It was on fire. There was, it's on fire. Northern Ireland has very favorable on-set pyro regulations. It's good. It's a good place.
It's way different than what we.
Yeah, if you want to light something on fire, the UK is Northern Ireland specifically is a good spot.
Yep. Next question.
Yeah, it was over here.
Right here. There we go.
Hi there. You kind of almost answered what I was going to ask, but from Game of Thrones or Westworld, what were some of the more practical, like technological devices that you used? Like, what were some of your favorites?
Oh, I mean, the flamethrower robot is always probably going to be like my top, in my top 10 of cool stuff. We use a lot of really neat drone technology on Westworld. And I think without we actually have a film camera that flies on a drone for Westworld because that show is a film show. But both shows benefited from drone technology immensely. Northern Ireland, we could only use it so much because of the high winds and rain and things. We actually used cable cameras a lot. So we would have two condors parked really far apart, and that cable camera can go incredibly fast, 35 or 40 miles an hour, which is significantly faster than a drone can go, and it can do it in the middle of of scattered rain and of wind and whatever else, and it makes the most terrifying zipping noise as it goes across. But I think all of that sort of point of view technology is the part that is the most impressive. The special effects stuff is always amazing, and I was talking about a couple of days ago on a panel. I just spent some time with some folks that have built a rig that can flip a car over on its roof right beside where it started, and it's amazing. It's super cool stuff, and that stuff's always neat, right? That little one-off special effects stuff. But I think from an impact standpoint, anything that puts the camera in a place that you've never seen a camera before, it gives you that point of view on action. That's what differentiates, what the audience sees from something they're seeing somewhere else. If we can give people that different point of view, then our stuff is looking that much different. Because, to be honest, we're all shooting on a small group of cameras. We're all shooting with a relatively small set of lenses, relatively speaking, and we're sort of shooting, in roughly the same aspect ratios, and color correction is sort of commonly accepted to be sort of, so making things look different in that respect is not limited, but you certainly have way more latitude when you're moving the camera, when you're putting the camera in difficult places. And technology, miniaturization of cameras, drone technology, cable camera technology has just allowed us to do that at such a cost-effective level that we're able to get some amazing photography. And obviously, it's very nice when you have a show full of dragons to be able to do, low-cost aerial photography. We can get you the point of view of the dragon more often because we're putting up a drone and not an entire helicopter, which is extremely expensive. And more than anything, it's very weather prohibitive. And it's a safety thing. If we drop a camera into the ocean on a drone, it's a bad day. If there's an accident with a helicopter, as is obviously just recently, it's a really terrible thing, and we don't ever want to be responsible for putting people in peril when we can put machines in peril until they become conscious and come after us. But at least for now, the drones aren't going to kill us on purpose. And so, when we can put safety behind a shot that would otherwise be too dangerous, too expensive, or maybe even just physically impossible with another piece of equipment, that's really exciting. And I think that we're getting so much more of that. Every year, there's some new camera system coming online. We just talked to a company that does a motion-controlled 4-point cable camera. So like the ones they use at football games that can move around the stadium, those are traditionally a guy with a joystick sort of moving them around. But now there's a company doing a complete motion control rig out of that. So they can do 100% repeatable motion with a cable-driven camera system, which is a huge step forward because the autonomy that you have with one of those floating 4-point cable camera systems is enormous. So as more and more of that technology comes online and we can put cameras in more creative and interesting and strange places, we really get a huge benefit to how our content looks different than other content. And when there's all these different streaming services all competing for your eyeballs, it's really important to have something that does stand out visually, and that's a great way to do that. And that's a great way for you guys to, as you're creating your own content, to sort of differentiate yourself from others. Is someone came up to me the other day in a green room and showed me their drone license, and that's fantastic. I mean, first of all, that's a great way to ingratiate yourself to filmmakers if you're able to to be correctly licensed and to be able to do those stuff legally and safely, and you understand the rules and how to apply them. That's a good job skill. But also, what a great way to have what would otherwise be a student film that sort of looks like everybody else's student film, and if it's done in a legal and safe way, what a great way to sort of elevate that to a whole different level. Something you just couldn't get, even 5 years ago. Quite frankly, you wouldn't have been able to do that. No, certainly no studio even 5 years ago could get some of the stuff that we're getting now for essentially consumer equipment. It really is amazing.
All right.
Thank you.
This will be our final question. Where are we at? Over here? Right here.
Queued up there.
All right, this will be our final one.
So my favorite episode is The Long Night, season 8, episode 3, and I think it's because I've always loved the concept of the undead and stuff like that. But in Game of Thrones, I think that it's the best job ever that's ever been done of that concept. So I was just gonna ask what is it like working with the people who play the dead? How many are on set? What's the acting process like?
Yeah.
What kind of coaching do they work? Because they're all amazing. What does it take?
That's a great question. Yeah, so the ones that you see close up are almost always stunt people. They're part of the stunt team, and in fact, the Night King is one of our stunt captains. That's how he started on the show. And I encourage you to watch the documentary that we made after the 8th season. But yeah, so there are a certain portion of them that are extras. There are a certain portion of them that are CG, and there is a small number of them that are stunt people. And so the stunt people are fantastic physical actors. They really do have a sense. Our directing team obviously works very close with them to get that. But then it's also the physical effects and makeup team, I think, that make those characters what they are. I think if up close to those guys on set, they are off-putting. They are. It is disturbing to be around some of those costumes because the amount of detail, the amount of realism that is painted onto the faces of those stunt people is really stellar. I mean, it is still 11R. It is really a big deal that they go through the kind of makeup and costume that they do for every level of sort of White Walker. From someone who's going to be 100 yards from camera being like a very high-end Halloween costume to somebody who is right up from to camera, being nearly indistinguishable from an actual undead person. And then, of course, we're also augmenting a certain amount with CG. There are some of them that are wearing green patches. They almost all wear green Zentai suits underneath, underneath the costume and makeup, so that if there are patches visible, we can thin them out and we can take pieces away. And, again, sort of having that very ghoulish, sort of unreal pieces missing, be able to see through them.
The ones that are just like full bone kind of.
Yeah, and be able to see through parts of their heads and things like that. I mean, it's just very unsettling, right? It's classic zombie stuff where, if you make it, the more grotesque you make it to a certain extent, the scarier the character is. And that also gives the actor the ability to sort of, they look in the mirror and they see that back, and it's much, again, the realism of that allows them to be more in the moment. Could we have done those all CG? Absolutely. We could have had every close-up White Walker done in CG, but would it have been as emotional, as creepy on set? Absolutely not. And would we have had that sort of direct feedback actor? No. And so I think that for those reasons, the legitimacy of those performances, the reason they're so scary, is because we've taken the classic rubber work horror approach to those people. Not because, again, we couldn't do it another way, but because I genuinely think that rubber work is the right way to do that. That's a term from the 1950s, so I apologize. But makeup effects as opposed to CG. We could have had them in gray Zentai suits with dots and tracked a CG character on top of the actors as well if we wanted to. But again, you're not afraid of a guy in a Zentai suit? Well, maybe. I mean, it's very creepy, but it's a different kind of creepy. Different kind of creepy. The Zentai suit, by the way, is the completely, if you ever want to, Zentai suit on Google, there's two groups of people that use Zentai suits. There's a visual effects industry and other groups of people as well. So if you ever want to Google, that's maybe not on a school computer, but it's a fun Google. But yeah, so but no, that's a great question, because I think that that's one element where the craftspeople and I came from a props background, so the craftspeople that go into the the sort of traditional, if you will, crafts on set, makeup, costumes, properties, scenic, the work that they did on Game of Thrones is, I don't know if there will be a rival on television of that level of craftsmanship. I don't know. I don't want to say ever again, because I'm sure there will be, but certainly anytime soon, those individuals working at such a high level, doing such an amazing job, it really is. It's a very special thing, to the point where we were off topic. I'll come back. In the final seasons, we were crafting our own jewelry by 3D printing an investment casting piece, and then actually investment casting that like you would a real piece of jewelry, so that the pendants, the rings, everything was custom made in our facility in Belfast. And Rick has been through all those buildings. Our costumes and properties department would create right down to the jewelry that people were wearing. The supporting cast was wearing, because of the level of detail necessary to make sure that the right house sigils were on the right people, and that members of the court had their sigils, which weren't even the sort of publicly available ones, but that they were woven into their clothing and their jewelry in such a way that the universe just felt so textured and realized. And I think that's an incredibly important part of what made the show sort of so remarkable.
Well, just say we walk through the armory, and it's an actual blacksmith shop. They're really there pounding metal and creating swords, and that was phenomenal. If you haven't watched any of the behind the scenes or the documentary, I really encourage you to do so. It's a real enjoyable experience. To really, you kind of feel like you understand the people who created it. And I will say, to a nod to the guy who did play that character, the Night King.
Oh, the Night King.
When I watched the documentary, I laughed, because you could tell he was not used to being famous. And when he walked through a crowd of fans, and they're like, he couldn't get enough. He'd walk and he'd go back. He'd leave and he'd go back, and it was really cool. So tonight is our Hall of Fame celebration. I encourage you to attend. We have a big block party. Stephen Beres is going to make a surprise appearance.
Oh yeah, right.
Yes.
That's right. Oh,
in
let's not forget about that.
crafted movie here at Full
Yeah,
Sail
that's
University.
right. I'm also going to do office hours at Career Development this afternoon. There will be a sign-up sheet in Career Development at 12 o'clock, at 12 noon. If you can find Career Development, I leave that to you.
It's right there.
And you can sign up for a 15-minute time slot if you have more to talk to, because I know we can't get everybody's questions in. So I'm going to make some time available this afternoon to sit and chat with. Gary Jones has already reserved 15 minutes, so that slot's already booked out. I don't know where it is, but everyone else is welcome to sign up for some time. There won't obviously be enough time for everyone, but and there won't be a sign-up sheet there until noon, so don't run over there right now. But do sign up for some office hours if you'd like to chat more.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us here and online. Let's give Stephen Beres another big hand. And thanks again.